Welcome to Cancer and Peace. My name is Stewart, and I'm facilitating a conversation with Peter Scalzo, our host and 18-year cancer survivor. And we're going to talk about another topic today along this journey. And last time we went down a road a little bit, or one of our previous episodes, we went down this road we called white knuckling it. And I thought that was good to talk about, where you were at in your journey and where you've white knuckled, and you shared some good examples. And this time what we wanted to talk about was the antidote to that, or the opposite, I think, to white knuckling it. And we're going to call it a journey of consecration. It's the opposite of trying to hang on to it, but to consecrate. And so I'm going to let you define. You and I both have had we like this term. It's something that is more, it's newer to what we would use, but I think it's good. I mean, if you're okay, are you ready to
I think just generally for me, and welcome to Cancer and Peace. Thank you so much for listening. Just a personal note, Sean and I commit this time for you, so that if you're on a cancer journey or whatever life's throwing at you right now, that hopefully we bring a perspective that's helpful and you're benefiting from it, because it's our pleasure to do it. It is a sacrifice, but it's our pleasure. So it's my passion to do it. So consecration.
It's a sacrifice for Peter to have to come and talk to me.
Yes. Yes. To talk to Sean. Consecration, when I first heard that term, I mean, I've heard it before, but just recently, we had a weekend retreat and I heard it on that retreat. And I thought, I like that word because for me, it connotates sacredness, being set apart. And, that's kind of like what holiness means, but taking it out of my hands and like surrendering it to my higher power, Jesus Christ. But more than just this concept of surrender for me, it's almost like asking for his blessing, his oversight, his anointing over this thing. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like more than just, hey, I'm going to surrender. Jesus, I want you to do something special in this space. I want you to bless it, anoint it. I want your favor on it. If that's your will, I want your favor on this thing. So I don't know if that's kind of like how I think about it.
No, I think that's really good. I think one of the reason why I think it's the opposite of white knuckling is when you're really hanging on to something really tight. That means that you're controlling it, and whatever the outcome is the outcome that you're steering it on. It doesn't mean that you can affect all the variables or the factors, especially with the cancer journey. Even though you may be hanging on to it tight, you may not be able to get the result that you want. But it is the act, I think, of releasing. But then not just releasing it to fall to the ground. It's releasing it into the hands of your higher power, in our case, Jesus Christ, and the consecration. But it's a conscious act too. So it's not just subconsciously you've released your cancer journey. It's taking the time at some point in your journey and whatever. And I say this because I'm, not coming from the exact same perspective, but it's whatever your wall moment is, that with a crisis in your life. And so if you're here and you have a cancer journey, it's all right, God, I'm going to take time now to officially, and with my heart and with my actual mouth, give you this cancer journey for whatever you want to accomplish out of this, whatever it is, I'm going to put it into your hands. And so, I'm going to bounce back to you. When did that happen? And maybe it didn't look exactly the way I described it. When did that happen in your cancer journey? And I think it did, the reason why. And so I'm making an assumption because I don't think we would be here talking about cancer and peace from our worldview if you hadn't got to a point where you consecrated this journey to him, that you were saying, hey, I recognize this journey is from you. Yeah. It has a purpose that's been given from you. It has, it's not just a curse, but it's actually something really important here in this journey. And I'm going to consecrate. I'm going to give it to you to control, to steer, to get whatever you want out of this.
Yeah, great point. I think for me, and this has been a journey for me, but this has been a very poignant part of the journey. I mean, this is something that has not been subconscious for me. It's been very conscious.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2005, for my first major surgery, Sloan Kettering, removing the bladder and section of the ureter, prostate, and all that, and replacing the bladder and the section of the ureter with intestinal tissue and all that involved. And it was a 3 to 4 week hospital stay afterwards because I had some issues. It was in that hospital room, and I think leading up to it, I think sitting there saying, dealing with the fear, anger, and sadness, first of all, which we've talked about, of the whole diagnosis, prognosis, because if it was outside the area, it didn't look like I would live very long. But dealing with that and getting to a place where I was, I think, slowly surrendering, slowly consecrating it. But I remember the verse distinctly that I felt like God wanted me to incorporate into my spirit and soul. And that was Galatians 2:20, for I have been crucified with Christ, and it's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives within me. And so, and the life I live by faith in the Son of God, that kind of thing. But I think it was this concept of early on in 2005 of this journey is a crucified journey. This is a journey in which, like Jesus on his journey to the cross, not my will, but your will be done. And this will be a journey of pain and suffering, but also one of delivering over to you. And, you know, I love Pete Scazzera that says, we all want to live the resurrected life, you know, the resurrection, but none of us, or I think it was Johnny Erickson Tada that said it, but none of us want to go through the crucified Jesus. We like the resurrected Jesus. And I was thinking about that, and I remember giving myself over to Jesus, not using the word consecration, but giving this cancer journey over to him. And I remember distinctly hearing his voice in my spirit and mind of, I want you to be transparent about this journey. And at the time, I was in the hospital recovering, and I thought, what?
Yeah.
Like, why would I want to be transparent about this? This has not been pleasant. It's been hard. It's been a tough time in my marriage. Just everything about it was difficult. And yet at Sloan Kettering in the hospital those days, that's when I experienced a presence of God that I think only a few times in my life have I felt a tangible presence like that, you know, a blanket and all that. But I think I didn't know what that fully meant to that I was to be transparent. I knew it sounded like there was a purpose and a plan in this, but I wasn't sure what that was going to look like. And then I went through the wilderness. Then I went through 10 years of getting checkups, getting surgeries, major surgery, all kinds of other kinds of surgery that happened as a result of this journey, all kinds of things. And in 2015, which was 10 years later, that's when I hit the wall of metastatic cancer. And at that point, it was, I'm in a hospital room. It's a 5% survival rate. And I've talked about this. This is the sea change in my journey, 10-hour surgery with 3 surgeons, Lenox Hill Hospital, ICU down in Manhattan. But this was the, did I get it wrong phase? Where are you, God? Why have you walked away? Why is this so bad? Why am I going to pass right now from this cancer? What is happening? Didn't you say to me I was supposed to be transparent about this? And so I believe to a certain degree, I consecrated the journey back in 2005. But then the wilderness phase and this phase was like, did I get it right? You know, like what's going on? And it was through this wall. And and being in the hospital and having him being completely bankrupt and being hopeless and doubting and everything that came along with that journey, all the negative, tough emotions, and then coming out of that and God ministering to me, rescuing me.
Can I ask, when was the time period? Because one of the stories that I liked, and it fits into something about consecration, I think, but it's the story where pre-surgery, you got the message from God that He's going to remove the cancer from your body, but He's also going to remove the cancer from, I believe it was your soul or your.
He said, so it was that first surgery, 2005. I was being wheeled in, and I had never had major surgery before. And I mean, when we talk about a packed operating room with 2 surgeons, it was packed. And as they were transferring me from the gurney to the operating table, they stretched my arms out. I had no idea they were going to do that. And at the time I was saying, for I have been crucified with Christ, no longer I who live.
I thought it was the same time. That's the reason why I was curious.
So it was, that was I surrender and give this journey to you. And I remember they laid my hands out, my arms out like a cross, just like a cross, because they were doing the IVs, getting the anesthesia in and all that. And in my, again, spirit and mind, I heard, I'm going to remove the physical cancer from you, and I'm also going to remove the spiritual cancer from you. And I thought, well, what does that mean?
So you did a consecration in your heart, and then as you go in, God gives you the message that He tells you what He's going to do.
Right.
And then now we're many years from 2005. We're in the 19th year, I guess, here right now from that original surgery. Yeah. And here it is. You've been through many surgeries. You've been through the wilderness, and that consecration still means something to you.
I mean, I feel in my heart of hearts, like in the core of my person, that God has been completely in this journey. This has been His plan and purpose for me. And I know that there are Christians that struggle with that concept. And it's the Joseph principle that we had that podcast that aired recently, and I listened to it again. And you did such a great job, Sean, of saying, what the enemy intended for evil or what you intended for harm, God intends for good. And it was the same. I believe it's the same principle with this cancer journey, but I haven't been this, I'm looking for opportunities kind of guy. I mean, 2014, a year before the 2015, was when I was introduced to recovery and the inner journey, because my marriage struggle had hit a fever pitch, a peak, and we were in a bad place. That's when I started the inner journey. In recovery is where I confessed all my sins, my secret sins, everything, to my counselor, then to men and everything. That's that God was removing. I of course still deal with my sinful life and who I am, but sure. Every week I'm in recovery meetings where I talk about it. And that was the spiritual surgery, because it was like a surgeon's blade going through the inventory part. 1 year in an inventory with a tough counselor, that was surgery. 2 hours every week, we would talk about my character defects, my list of issues, and yes, balanced, positives too, but we dove into myself. It was hard.
I'll put out a concept a bit, and just to see how it fits in with consecration, because you mentioned something about, in your cancer journey, it didn't mean you didn't go through toughness, and that some people struggle with this. And I was having a great conversation just recently with a buddy of mine, and we were talking about this idea. And it is, you hear this term health wealth, and can you pray yourself healing? Can you pray yourself a new car, a new house, or whatever? And some people will point to scripture that will say, hey, if you ask anything in my name where 2 or 3 are, I'll give it to you. And there's this idea that, it has to be asked with enough faith, or the right people have to be there. And I think what we're talking about with consecration is a little different. And I think what we're really talking about is that we align our spirits with God's spirit.
Mm.
And then these verses come alive with a lot of power,
Mm-hmm.
because when our spirit is aligned with God's spirit, if we ask for something that his spirit has laid upon us, that he's given us, we're asking for his heart,
Mm-hmm.
and he has the ability and the power to move on this. But I think the difference in what I think is happening here is, I'll give a earthly example. If you've been around, let's say you know a friend who has a really wealthy dad or a family,
Mm.
and but this friend isn't somebody who wears the fanciest clothes and drives the fanciest cars. They are the people who can interact at any level and never flaunt their wealth or their family status. They basically just live a normal life with normal people, and you wouldn't even know. And the best example that I can give of this is Jesus.
Mm.
As Jesus had the wealthiest father
Mm.
anywhere,
Mm-hmm.
but he came in and he lived with the poor. He had all the advantages, the power of the kingdom was with him. As long as he aligned his will to his father's will, everything that he wanted to accomplish was going to be accomplished. And he could rely on his family name. He could rely on what the family business or the family purposes were to be accomplished were going to happen in his life. And they did.
Mm.
And
Hmm.
it's the same for us.
Mm.
Is when we consecrate our lives to God, it is as if we are saying, hey, Father God, as your son or daughter, I know that I have access to the greatest riches ever, where you are richer than Elon Musk. And whatever you want to accomplish, you will.
Mm.
And I surrender whatever I thought about what I wanted to do, whether it be fast cars or fancy clothes. That's not my focus. I don't mind living in the ordinary,
Mm-hmm.
because whatever your family purposes are, whatever those things are, they're my purposes.
Mm.
And I'm going to give my journey to you as the purpose of my life. That is consecration. And sometimes in my own life, I get really caught up in the fast cars and the fancy stuff and lose track of what's actually happening. But it's as if we're saying, I'm going to change the narrative, the story that I'm living my life, to this narrative that God, you're in complete control, and whatever's happening with this cancer journey or this wall moment in my life, I'm just going to surrender it to you, and I'm going to trust you with it. And I'm going to believe that you have my best in it, even if it's hard, even if it's a diagnosis in 2014, coming out of that 2015 surgery of this is metastatic and there's nothing else we can do.
Yeah. So I just want to share how God brought out what I believe was his purpose in this journey. Because I was not aggressive about it. As I've mentioned before, when I was in the hospital, a buddy of mine came down and got down on his knees and said, what do I do for Peter? And he brought me down this empty journal. He just slapped the journal on my chest and left. And 4 days later, I picked it up and I started to write, and I was very honest and raw with the Lord. And out came a whole bunch of stuff, but also scriptures, and all the truth that he wanted me to walk in was poured out on those pages. And so I left the hospital, and a buddy of mine who had throat cancer, he and his wife invited me over to their house. I didn't know it, but he had 1 week left on this earth, and then he transitioned to be with Jesus. But he asked me, he couldn't speak anymore, so he wrote down, what was it like? And I said, the only thing I know how to do is to read this journal that I wrote, because it's got all my feelings and everything that happened. And as I was reading it, we all began to weep. And I'm like, something's going on here that's not me, because this is beyond me. But this was a consecrated journey. God, this is your journey. This was not anything that I wrote that was like unbelievable. It was just an experience, and then God drawing out what he wanted to draw out. And then all of a sudden I found I was asked to speak at 2 church groups. All I did was read this journal. Same response. Then a couple churches invited me. I sat on a chair in front and read this journal to the whole body. And I can't think of anything more boring, but I'm sure some teenagers went to sleep. But I was being asked to share this thing. And then I read it and it was filmed and all that. But I was like, I don't even understand what's happening. Then I was sitting in an elder meeting and I was struggling with some pain. And the chairman of the elders was in charge of the local National Prayer Breakfast event, like 600 people, all the city leaders came, all that stuff. And he looked over at me and he said, "You're going to be our next speaker." Public speaking is not something, I mean, yes, I was an attorney, but I stuttered at times. I had a lot of fear about doing it, but there was something burning inside of me. There was a message burning, and I was like, I don't know what to do with this burning message. And I had just had a discussion with the Lord, and I said, I will say yes to you if you ask me to do something in this space. Darn, when I said that. But anyway, and then all of a sudden I was asked, would you speak at this event? And I think you went to that event.
I did, yeah.
Yeah, but it was I remember writing out my script and then showing up that morning, and I was kind of like eating breakfast, and I looked down at the brochure for the event, and my picture was there, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm the speaker. And I wanted to throw up. That was my physical response. But I got up, delivered it, and then, just really wild, someone who was at the event got in touch with me later and said he was driving his car. He had to pull over because he was crying. And it was just, it tears me up to think about the fact that God can use the pain and suffering in our lives when we consecrate it. I think that's a key. I think what we're getting at here is very key. I mean, even for the book that I wrote, I was at a gala and 2 to 3 people came up to me independently and said, "Can I read your book?" I didn't have a book. I didn't want a book. And then a pastor came up who I didn't know and said, "God told me to tell you to write a book." It's like, Lord, do you have to, it's like God has to hit me over the head. But this was his journey. It was my journey and his, because I had given it to him, consecrated it to him. So I do think this consecration act has been a big part of my journey.
Yeah, I want to highlight something you said earlier, maybe 10 minutes ago, is that God said that he wanted you to be transparent.
Mm.
And so you just talked for the last few minutes about the asks of transparency to read your journal in front of a church.
Yeah.
It sounded boring to you, but it was something that was deeply vulnerable. And for human beings, for us to have real relationship requires vulnerability. And everybody has some level of vulnerabilities because we're humans. It's impossible for us not to be vulnerable in some way. But to expose our deepest emotions and our deepest hurts is a level of vulnerability that I think you were being asked in your consecration because it was where you were going to find your greatest joy.
Wow. Yeah.
And so you just described where you felt tears of joy, where God used your consecrated life for the purposes he wanted to accomplish. And I think that's happening with this podcast as we get to share together what's happening in your life in this cancer journey, how consecration works. And so that was a concept that we wanted to put out for everybody, is that to think about their own lives. Have they consecrated their journey to God?
It's huge. And I'll just say this, it's been like, I'm getting emotional during this podcast, thinking about how God has used it for me, like you said, in my best interest, but also in the interest of others, and thinking this is available for all of us. we all can consecrate our journeys, and God can use it. And we don't even know how many. I've seen it so often where God has used people's cancer journeys to impact their families, to impact other people. I mean, it's unbelievable.
It's incredibly powerful
Yeah.
because suffering always comes with deep meaning in a cancer journey. Cancer journey, by definition, is a journey of suffering.
Mm.
And if you're wondering how to consecrate your journey, I think there's the word, saying the words, but it's a heart condition.
Mm-hmm.
It's recognizing where your heart's at, and I think one of the reasons why I think we did the podcast white knuckling it was to see if you identified with areas where you were still hanging on, that you were still trying to control or hang on to the details of your journey. But at the point where you're saying, no, I recognize that I'd rather have God directing, guiding.
I think for me, the crucified life, the life that is yielded and surrendered, that's why that verse was so important to me. That's what it meant for me was, okay, like Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, and then taking that journey to the cross and voluntarily giving up his life. That's a crucified, consecrated journey.
Yeah. And Jesus said the words, not your will, or not my will, but your will be done. Yes. And that's the point where I think you've made the surrender. Mm-hmm. And then the next words, I think, that are great when you're to the point where you're saying, not your will, or not my will. I keep saying it backwards. Maybe it's because I'm struggling with something here. Not my will, but your will be done, God. Mm-hmm. Then I think you can say with honesty, Lord, I give this journey, this cancer journey, to you. I put it into your hands for whatever purposes you want to accomplish. I give the duration, the length, the output, the product, the healing, the suffering. I put all of that into your hands, and I give everyone, my relationships, all my possessions, all the things around me, to you.
Yeah.
And you can literally open your hands just to release all these things into God's hands. And I think this is a prayer you say all the time, to stay in that posture of consecration, because it's not just a one-time event. We have to continue to release and consecrate, because sometimes we probably every time you are asked to do a scan, there's a temptation to pick it up again and to try to control it as the outcome or avoid or
deal with those tough emotions.
To deal with the tough emotions. That's right.
Yeah, that's what conjures. I mean, I know that this journey is God's journey for me to be on, and I've consecrated it, but that doesn't mean I still don't deal with the tough emotions.
And that's where you go back to, I give everyone, everything, this journey to you.
Benevolent detachment, John Eldridge. Yeah.
And just say that every day as a way of releasing it to God. And I think it helps to physically open your hands to symbolically release whatever you're holding on to, because it's white knuckling when you're holding your fist tight. Yeah. That's, you're hanging on to it, but it's releasing that. So to physically release when you say this prayer is just a way of doing that, because it's telling your body something too. And we are able to just sense and feel in our emotions as we release. And I think this is a powerful part of the cancer journey, or of any journey, where you're ready to consecrate that journey to God in such a way that you're going to start trusting him with the next steps, not needing to control. It doesn't mean, and I like to repeat this a little bit, it doesn't mean to stop doing things. It doesn't mean to stop treatments. It doesn't mean to not do the journey. It means you're trusting him and his wisdom and what he's doing in the journey, but you keep taking steps. Right. But you're not ultimately trying to white knuckle over control. Right. As you're trusting him with the very next step. And if you don't know what the next step is, then you're asking him what the next step is, and you take time to listen. And that's a great exercise too that we can talk about, is listening to God's voice on the next step.
Mm.
And that's the consecration journey. I think it's such an important part of your journey that you can now look back in time and see that you did consecrate your journey and you did hear God give you different instructions along the way or what
Yeah.
he's doing with your journey. And now you can see how he did it
Yeah.
and is still doing it. Well, what an
And
amazing,
and
think about it.
his purpose may be impacting one person. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like
Oh, yeah, yeah.
your child may be so impacted by your faith in the journey, your surrender to God, that's the one person that God, stand before Jesus, he's going to say, you consecrated that journey to me for this person.
That's such a good point. And I think we don't easily think generationally. We usually think about, am I speaking in front of 650 people at the prayer breakfast? And the reality is that it's generally those that are closest to us and those relationships that God has given us. And sometimes it's generational. And one of the most impactful testimonies of mission was a ministry that came through our church, and they were talking about, and this has stuck out to me because like the first missionary went to Iran, I believe, and they spent 40 years and they saw almost zero fruit from their interactions in Iran. Second generation goes,
yeah,
zero fruit. And the third generation and goes, and it's one of the fastest growing connection churches in the world. And I sit and think to myself, I don't think I have the faith to be generation 1 or 2.
Yeah.
Because if my life feels like I didn't see any impact, but the truth is those were very important generations, and it took more faith to be generation 1 or 2, where maybe their impact was only on 1 or 2 lives that seemed less distinct and meaningful, but without the ability to walk through generation 1 and 2, generation 3 never happens.
Right.
And
I think about my 6 kids have been through this journey with me, and we don't have a medical background. It's just they participated in this journey with me, and not only have they learned about the inner journey, recovery, and walking through pain and suffering, but 3 of them, one's a 3rd-year medical student, almost 4th year. One's a ICU nurse down in Manhattan, and the other one's a biomedical engineer that the pharma she works for just came out with a brand new colorectal drug. Now, would they have gone into those fields? They stayed in the hospital with me many times when they, when this first was going on, when they were younger. So I think God used this journey to impact them, even in the professions that they are choosing, So
that's so good.
It's interesting. Yeah. But just the impact of how do I travel through pain and suffering? And it can be messy at times. It's messy at times. They haven't seen a father that says Jesus is Lord through this journey at all. They've seen a guy say, I'm struggling.
Yeah.
I'm having a rough time. They've watched me cry. They've seen me. My son has seen me in a very difficult place.
Not wanting to go forward. Yeah.
No. Yeah. Walking away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ready to tap out.
Yeah, that's right. Ready to tap out.
And here you are. The power of consecration is big.
Yes.
And the reason this is so important is going back to the narrative, the story we live our life by. The real story isn't a fairy tale. We literally have a father whose family in which he wants to bless with infinite resources and with the most impactful life possible that he could give you, waiting to do that. But it doesn't mean it easy. Doesn't mean that it's going to be something that is just like a happy birthday or something like that. It's literally going to be take another step with him and start living in that narrative that he's in control of this journey, and he's going to give you his absolute best for the purposes that he's given you to begin with to accomplish. And it's going to happen if you'll consecrate your story to him, your life, and walk in it.
Thanks, Sean.
That's great today's message. Podcast. So yeah, it was it's fun. It's hard. And
Yes.
we're both wrestling with that, what consecration means in our own
Yep.
lives. But hopefully you got something out of this. Thanks for
Yeah.
listening to Cancer and Peace.
Thank you.
And go check out the website, cancerandpeace.com. And if you haven't already, that book that Peter didn't want to write is out there. Check it out. It's a good read. I have read it. He can't get any of his girlfriends to read it, but I think
Girlfriends.
I think it's worth the read. You guys will enjoy it and find and get a lot out of it. So check it out, and thanks for listening.
Thank you.